Good afternoon. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. I got caught up in a conversation. Okay. So I went live this morning and we did a subscriber live, only live this morning, and I discussed a few things and we talked about let's actually do that. Yeah. We talked about toxic masculinity versus and toxic femininity versus sacred masculinity and sacred femininity. And when we talked about it, I also talked about opening these up more as, or instead of doing a subscriber only live, doing it as a subscriber only commenting live, and still maintaining other lives in which I can open it up and take it in different directions, but turning my subscriber only lives, which at this point are lives where you can comment and lives, hello Decray, lives where you can pop up and talk as well and discuss. So turning it into a discussion live, having the subscriber only lives instead of only being subscribers being open, but limiting the commenting and the popping up to subscribers. And so I think we're going to do that instead of just the subscriber lives, just because now, hold on, because I love you all and I don't want you to feel that you have to subscribe when you're poor and broke, because I know that many of you are poor and broke like me. So I don't want you to feel that you have to be able to talk, because we will still be having lives that you can talk, right? Not only that, I do have a YouTube channel. If you go to the link tree in my bio, that I am live streaming on right now as well, which you can comment there. But it does limit very much the incoming amount of troll, right? So please don't get me wrong. I absolutely love the subscriptions and I absolutely love the ability to refine things. I absolutely love the ability to change the dynamic. And I absolutely love the support. Not going to lie, right? I'm not going to front. I would be stupid, right? So absolutely. But I don't want that to become, I don't want it to be Paygate, right? I don't want it to be. That's the whole point. So if you are watching and you're like, man, I really want to comment, I have questions, I am over on YouTube and you can find that in the link tree in my bio. And so I'm going to actually start dual streaming so that we have that ability, right? But it will kind of narrow down the trolls a bit and kind of keep this a safe space, right? Just to make sure, right? Because and also because a lot of the people that interact in here that are and many who have subscribed are people who have education and knowledge on a lot of different fields and a lot of different thought processes. And I really like encouraging that. And I really like learning myself, right? So like I can pick somebody's brain and learn something completely new that I did not understand before, right? And so that's very important to me too. And so I had always hoped to be able to have that space, but from the very beginning of doing these lives, it got trolly as fuck. And those who've been in since the very beginning will see and will tell you that even when it was only 50 people at the very beginning, even in times when it's very, very few, not more than 8, it would get just trolly as fuck. And it wasn't the pictures because, I would have Denny in the background, right? It was the words that would state would get it very trolly. And anytime I stated anything that wasn't heteronormative, right-wing Christian thought process within my country, it became extremely very fucking trolly. And so to create a safe space for myself as somebody who has issues with safe space, I had to lock it down. I had to get mods, everything I could do, right? I didn't want to lock it down. But I had to at some points. I had to get mods from the very beginning. That's why I have mods. Like, who the fuck has to have mods on a goddamn TikTok? It's just weird to me. So this gives that extra barrier. It gives that safe space. But we will still have lives that we open this up. It just provides that safe space in this live. So that only people that are intent on the knowledge of it, right? Possibly. Okay, so that's what I wanted to go. So I want to talk about Homo erectus again tonight, but I want to do that with a challenge for you all. And this is my challenge. I watched Lee Berger's presentation. I watched the speech that Lee Berger gave on Homo naledi, with Cambridge University. And I was fascinated. I am in love. So we've talked about Naledi in here, and I'm sure that you've seen just how fascinated and in love with Naledi that I truly am. And he really pointed out some of the things that we have talked about, the greater intelligence. And some of the things that he talked about, I didn't know was why they were seeing things like the fact that I think all actually of these bones are on the surface, right? I had heard it in a different way, or like I had heard that there had been like, it was more of a disturbed bones. And I think this is in one cavern, but almost all of these bones have been on the surface like they were laid out, right? And when you hear him describe it, he talks about it being a dig site that is 1 meter wide by like, I think he said the most was like, and I'm horrible with numbers. So, but like just centimeters deep, right? Just centimeters deep. And he was like, you in archaeology will understand this. And I do, because what it is it means that very, very, very top layer, like you're just digging down, like imagine you're out in your front yard that's compacted, right? And you're digging down just a hair's breadth, right? Just a hair's breadth. Bones are exposed at this layer, at this already, right? You're already seeing portions of bones up, right? So it's very fascinating when you hear him talk about it. But he also talks about some of the bones being on shelves or niches, and some of the bones being placed specifically. So this is all indicative of ritual, like we were talking about. And he talks about the fact that he is giving this, but everything else is going through the vetting process, which we've talked about in here, and the need for the vetting process, right? That need to go through the vetting process that I really wish that they would show for the Indonesian pyramid, that process, right? So that need for the vetting process. And he talks about, as these things are going through the vetting process and as we're starting to understand them and as they're starting to solidify, we will be releasing more information. We have like 3 or 4 more bits of it. Oh my God. So I have a challenge for you, all of you who love this. So tomorrow, I will go ahead and do a live based on Naledi and based on Lee Berger's thing. The YouTube link for it, so free for everybody, is in the very top of the link tree in my bio, right? It's the very first thing. I would challenge you to go and watch this. It's about an hour and 10, 15 minutes long, maybe 30. But you will enjoy the people who are talking. They all have a sense of humor, and you will enjoy what you're hearing. Right. The only thing I found was literally, it looks kind of like a conference poster, right? Like it's several different blurbs on several different spaces within Indonesia, right? Yeah, no, that's what I was talking about. That's the only thing I can find. It's the only thing I can find. But I would challenge you all, if this is something that you love and this is like the learning thing that you're enjoying, and if you just want to get in deeper, okay, so my challenge for you is to go and watch it, top of the link tree in my bio, all for free, and come back tomorrow. I'll go ahead and set up a live, and I'll probably do hold on, I gotta check my schedule. This might pause me for a hot second. I had planned on doing this before I came in, but I forgot. Okay, sorry about that. I had planned on doing it before I came in, but then I forgot. So I am done with my appointments by noon, so I'll be home by like 12:31. So I know that's going to be late for some people in Europe, and I apologize. But I will go ahead and put a live notice. So 1 p.m. my time right now, it's 9 p.m. my time, right? So a few hours ago tomorrow. And we'll put up a live notice. But then what I challenge is for everybody to come in. And if you have watched this, if we've talked before, if I know you as a safe zone, I will open up so that you can come up live if you have the amount of followers that you want. And I will keep comments open as much as I possibly can until it gets nasty and trolly. And we will discuss as a group and talk about how amazeballs this is and what this might mean for us, what this might mean for our understanding of the evolution of history and all of that shit that we wonder about all the time. And all of those things that we're like, what about? What about? Could it be? Could it be? So I want you to go and watch this, and you're really going to love it. We're not going to talk about Naledi tonight, other than the average things that we talk about with Naledi. We will talk about Homo erectus and talk about the average things that we do when we're talking about Homo erectus. But tomorrow we will do a focus again on Homo naledi and Lieberger's information. And I will put all that information out. Again, we're going to do the same setup. If you're over here on YouTube, I am watching you as well for comments. So that way we can give the ability to comment if you want to, even when it's subscriber only comments, but it gives you the ability to comment in a way that keeps it safer for everybody. So we're just going to do it that way for tonight. Tomorrow, we will just open all of this. We will stream it over there as well, but we will just open all of this up as long as it stays sane. And as long as, and again, I have to know you. You can't just be popping in from out of nowhere. I can't just let just anybody up. I'm sorry. It's a safety zone for me. And if that's problematic for you, it's not like I'm fucking with your freedom of speech. You're free to say whatever the hell you want. This is my safe zone, right? I get to make it my safe zone. So, so you're welcome to go live and challenge it, from your own safe zone. We'll do that tomorrow. Tonight, let's talk about Homo erectus, and let's talk about we talk in here a bit, and I try to express it, and I think I've tried to express it maybe a little bit more lately, that when we look at species before us, when we look at erectus, when we look at Neanderthal, when we look at Florensis, when we look at all of these other species, I guess Florensis isn't really before us, but when we look at all these other species, we need to understand that we're not looking at primitive beings. Not in your idea of primitive and not what you would think of as primitive. We're not looking at beings who are there. Sorry, I tossed something to the floor here. We're not looking. Sorry, you got the weird shot over there. We're not looking at beings who actually, I do this so well, are primitive in the sense that you want to think of as primitive. You're looking at people who just have not invented the tools that you've invented so far. And all of the tools that they invented are the tools that you are living on, right? Are the basis of everything you're living on. Without Homo erectus, the person behind me developing fire, I know you can't see the TikTok live, but if you would, you would. Then you would not get to the point that you were even eating food that was cooked and therefore pre-digested and therefore giving you the greater brain capacity that you have, right? Would not even get to that point. The Lieberger challenges brain capacity having anything to do with it, because Naledi challenges. Anyways, so I'm probably going to flots on that for a hot minute. So a lot of people will ask when they're coming in, what and why is the picture behind me? So the picture behind me is Homo erectus, and Homo erectus is the species that comes prior to us. Homo erectus is the species in Africa that we all believe usually, it may change as things are coming along, that we descend from, right? We are in a period with anthropology and archaeology that everything is changing daily, that is leaps and bounds forward. And so what I understand today might be a different understanding tomorrow. And I always like to put that up front, right? Like I want you to know that this is my understanding of it today. Tomorrow it might be different. Many people ask why we're looking at somebody who has black skin. And many people equate it to the idea that I'm trying to display black skin as primitive. And that is not the case at all. The dark skin that we see on Homo erectus behind us is because Homo erectus speciates in Africa. And dark skin is an advantage in Africa. If you speciate in Africa looking like I do, you're not going to survive very long. It's very hot. And it's very sun beating down on you all the time kind of environment. To have skin this color, you really need to be in an environment that has heavy cloud cover. And this color skin, it can't be an evolution forward as our species. It can only be an adaptation, because an evolution forward as our species is something that in every region that our species lives in, this is an evolutionary advantage. And it is not. Because if I take this skin in a region that has high sun, this is not an evolutionary advantage. This could get you killed, right? Because the sun beating down on light skin, I actually tan, and I don't burn very often, but the sun beating down on light skin for people who do burn easily is deadly, right? And the sun beating down even on somebody like me who does not have that extra protection of the UV layer is going to cause problems within my skin. So you absolutely have to have the extra protection of UV, of the melanin. It's not a layer, and layer was kind of a misnomer, but that extra melanin that protects that UV within the skin to not have those problems in that area. And therefore, speciating in Africa, you have to speciate with darker skin. And again, therefore, having the darker skin is actually the evolutionary advantage. Having light skin is not an advantage as a species whole, and therefore it is not an evolutionary step forward. It's just an adaptation for a specific area, and you can't take it anywhere else, or you will be a disadvantage, right? Whereas dark skin actually persists in Europe until about 2,000 years ago is when you're going to see the vast majority of the population becoming light skinned. 5,000 to 6,000 years ago is when you're going to start to see a middle of the road of the population becoming light skinned. Up until that, everybody is as dark skinned as the Homo erectus behind me, or at least the vast majority of the population is light-eyed, blue-eyed, but dark skinned. So it is not an evolutionary advantage. It's only specific in a specific area. And that counts. Or that matters, right? That is important, the fact that it is only specific in a specific area. When we're looking at Homo erectus, we're looking at the species that we come from. Really, we're looking at the species that great diversity and being a fully upright being was able to make it across the globe. And they pass these traits to us and are the reason that we are able to do the same thing. What we see with Homo erectus is a species that has a great range of height and a skeletal structure pretty much like ours from, the chin down, really. What we see is that there's a few differences in the morphology of the spring of the feet, maybe. The hips are a little bit broader. The skulls of their newborns are smaller. So they're not going to have the midwife-assisted birth mandatorily that we do. And you're going to see a group that is in all other ways really like us. They are not the first species that we see that we call Homo, that would be Homo habilis, and not the first species that we see that uses stone tools or leaves tools in a fossil record, but the first species that we see that is capable of not capable. So it's capable of moving the stone tools from the Oldowan complex into the next stage in the Acheulean hand axis, but also the first species that we see that really is shaped like us. And this is why we call them erectus, upright. So Homo means human, so they are upright man. So, and this is because their body, their shoulder girdle, their upright body is shaped in the same kind of bipedal walking, no longer arboreal, swinging in the trees, shoulder girdle and fingers and the lengths of the arms. So Homo habilis, you're seeing much more of the arboreal state of the upper body, longer arms, and still some curvature to the phalanges, which means that your finger bones in a human or Homo sapien are pretty much flat like this, whereas in a in Naladi and in hapless, they're a little bit more like this, right? So Homo erectus has the body structure that we have. And this is really the first time we fully see that. And we see this at 2 million years ago. Homo habilis before them is where we kind of believe that they are starting from. And the end of Homo habilis and the beginning of Homo erectus, they're living alongside each other for quite, and their family, right? They're the next stages from each other. If they're the next stages from each other, if we're not missing something in the fossil record, right? If they're the next stages from each other, they're family, they're moving alongside each other, you know, they're changing as their babies are developing and changing and growing. So when you see Homo erectus starting at 2 million years ago, you see that this body structure takes them out of Africa almost immediately, because you see they make it out of Africa at 1.8 million years ago. So when you look at that, you see the fact that Homo erectus is just capable of a new level that we don't see before. And all of this comes from not just that expedient bipedalism, that ability to move across the globe, but it comes from several other factors that Homo erectus has that are really rooted in science. And so I'm going to go ahead and talk about what science is for a hot minute, and then we're going to go into what those factors is. Science is, I see in nature, I have a hypothesis or think what it must mean. I predict what I can affect or what that must mean. I test it. And if my testing fails, I have to reset. I have to go back to my hypothesis. And if my testing proves true, then I have a theory, and I continue to retest the theory until I either, I continue to test it until I fail. If I never fail, I never fail. But if the testing starts to fail, then I have to go to the hypothesis and revamp my theory. So when you look at the capabilities that Homo erectus has, what you're looking at, starting with fire, is really a level of science. Homo erectus is the first species that we see that has the ability to control and husband or have some form of maintenance over fire. We see this in hearths. We see this in cooking food. There was a recent article that came across indicating that there was a big discovery with fish teeth in a fire, burnt fish teeth that is attributed to Homo erectus at 780,000 years ago. And we have known of this before. We have known of Homo erectus eating food before, cooked food, eating food. I've done it. I was doing that this morning as well. I'm a little discombobulated today. And when we see the eating or the ability to cook food, we see that the ability to cook food gives the ability to grow brains in infants. Once you have extra caloric intake, which you get from the ability of cooking food, pre-digesting your food, and that pre-digestion of the food gives a greater caloric intake for a smaller amount of food. And when you have that and you're carrying a child or you're taking care of a young child whose brain is growing, that extra calories goes to the brain development. So you get the larger brains in the descendants of your species, whether it's in your own children or it's in, a few hundred generations down the road. And because you see that use of fire, and because that use of fire gives that ability to develop larger brains, you absolutely see that this is a scientific method of actually giving us larger brains and kind of creating who we are. That is a very earthly scientific method, right? We also see that with fire that you can create tools for hunting that you cannot create at this time out of stone. So at this time, we see that Homo erectus has taken the tool complex from the Acheulean hand axe tools to from the Oldowan tools to the Acheulean hand axe tools. And the old Acheulean hand axe tools, the smallest of them are about 6 inches. They're kind of a teardrop shape. The base of them is something that you would hold in your hand. It's a little bit thicker, and around the entire side of them is really sharp. I'm going to show you a couple examples. When I do this, my entire screen will go blank for a hot second over here on TikTok. So just so you know, I will be right back. And you probably won't hear me, but I still like to talk just so that you know I'm here if you do hear me. So this is an early Acheulean hand axe from Homo erectus. And this gives you an idea of the shape, but it also shows how you have this more roughness to the early hand axes. What you're seeing with the early hand axes is that it's kind of this change in this adaptation from an older tool complex and from just an early understanding of flint knapping stone. And so you can see that there's kind of these big chunks out of it. It's not really smooth, right? As they move down the line, and again, this is going to freeze me out for a hot second. Just so you know, I'm going to go ahead and talk while I'm still doing it, so you know I'm still here. That when... Yes. Okay. So this is a later Acheulean hand axe. You see where in this later stage, it's smoother. The knapping of the stone is finer. I do not know what the differences is in these stones. I'm not a geologist, and the site that I pulled these pictures from did not say what the difference is in the actual stone. These things are important, right? You know, we should know the difference in the stone to be able to see the fineness of the knapping, because when you're knapping flint, the differences in the stone count. But you can also see the fact that this is never really the big rough flakes that the other one even starts out as, right? And so you can see that there is this fineness within it. And looking between the two stones, I would state, having seen a few different things, that the other one looks like it's more of a break in flakes style of a stone than this. Like, I don't think it's flint. It doesn't look like it, but it could be some kind of flint, and I don't know, right? But the way that the breaks are on that stone looks like it takes less skill to get that kind of a break, whereas a stone like this looks like it doesn't break as easily in shale flakes as that other stone would have. Again, not knowing, that's just a rough idea of the stones. I'm going to change this back, and it's going to pause me for a second when I do. When we look at them taking these tools to this next level, we don't see these really, or I wouldn't see these as a hunting tool. I've seen like maybe one article that attributed them as that, but I still have not really seen a whole lot of scholarly articles that attribute to them as that. And this to me is because of the fact that, to me, I can see where they see it as a hand axe or a chopping tool or a cleaver tool, which is why they call it a hand axe, the Acheulean hand axe. But for me, I also could see it as a scraper. Like, I can see where you can scrape hide with it, right? But I also know that there's no way that I am running up on any large animal with a 6-inch singular stone in my hand and trying to stab you in the neck or in the eye. I mean, what the heck am I even trying to get through at this point, right? So I do not see the Acheulean hand axe being used as a hunting tool. And because there's no flat surface to attach it to a piece of wood, to a length of spear, or to a length for even like an arrow if it was way smaller, you are not going to see that this is something that you can really attach, right? You're not going to see that this is something that you can really implant in anything or attach to anything. This is a handheld device. So with fire, though, comes the ability to create a hunting tool. And what that is a spear. And you probably think, well, you know, if you had the ability with a hand axe, maybe you could sharpen your spear. Maybe that's what the hand axe does. But if you were a kid who liked to get rough and rowdy, you might have made spears out of sticks. And if you did that and you used a knife from your mama's kitchen, or maybe somebody had given you a pocket knife, and you shave off the end of this stick that you've got in your hand, you're going to notice that after you've got your nice fine point, you know, which takes a while to make it actually stay, because a lot of times they'll just kind of split at the end anyways. And you go to either hit, you know, a tree or your sibling, depending on your nature, or, you know, your play. you're going to find that the tip mushrooms. It doesn't actually penetrate, right? And this is because of the fact that when you've shaved it with a knife, what you have done is broken the integrity of the wood. And in that breakage of the integrity, the point is a broken point. There's no integrity to it. And often the wood itself doesn't have a lot of strength. You might see that even the stick itself bends. But if you were to take a stick and a young sapling, maybe not just necessarily a stick, and heat it at a fire, and once it got really hot, kind of rolled it away and let it cool down, and then heated it at the fire again, and then rolled it away and let it cool down, and did this over and over, you would do something we call tempering, which we still do with steel today. And you're not going to quite achieve the steel effect, but what you are going to achieve is a hardened effect. And then if you take the tip of that and you stick it in a fire and you kind of rub that tip off on a stone into a rounded point after you've kind of burned it, and maybe you burn it again and rub it again, you can get this nice fine point and tip that you can actually hunt with, right? So fire gives us a couple of different things. It gives us the ability to get a greater caloric intake for less amount of food, therefore giving us greater brain capacity. And it also gives us the ability to create better hunting tools. We also see that fire gives us, that warmth and these other things that we know it gives. But we're going to see with some of the things that we'll talk about tomorrow with Naledi that a fire actually can give some more stuff that we weren't aware of and we weren't thinking of. That we're aware of, we just weren't thinking of. But these are the two things that we've really attributed to Homo erectus's use of fire so far. The next thing that you see besides fire and tools is the fact that Homo erectus is really the first that we see to use clothing. And we know that Homo erectus uses clothing because we see a presence of body lice at about 170,000 years ago in Homo erectus sites. And it takes a couple 100,000 years, if not a million, to get from the mutation from the scalp or hair lice to body lice. And a big part of that mutation is the loss of hair. So as long as this hair covers your whole body, then the lice that lives in this hair is what's going to cover your whole body. But when this hair migrates only to specific areas of your body, the lice that lives in your body itself, the lice that is going to inhabit the areas of your body that are hair, because that hair has become slightly different. And because of the way it's set up, are going to take a while to mutate. And not only are they going to take a while to mutate, but they're going to take a lack of hair on your skin. And then they're going to take the covering of clothing, because the covering of clothing is what protects them so that they can live, right? It hides them, it camouflages them, because if you have no hair on your skin, you have no camouflage for them. You can pick it off, right? So we see that you have to have that use of clothing to get to the point that you have body lice. We also see with Homo erectus that they have language. And this is something that we trace because of the fact of the shape imprint of the brain on the base of the skull. So the imprint for language is on the base, the back of your skull or back of your brain, and it imprints on the base, right? And the pathways can tell us whether or not something has verbal language. And I do want to specify in this time in this space that everything has language. Trees have language, cats have language, dogs have language, all animals have language, all plants have language, and the earth itself has a language if you listen really well. So everything has language, but verbal language is a difference for us. And so we see that Homo erectus has the ability for verbal language, and we see that Homo erectus not only has the brain patterning for it, but it has the lung capacity. So you have to have a certain kind of shape and capacity to your rib cage to give the lung capacity to actually be able to speak, because this takes a lot of my lung capacity, right? So we see that Homo erectus absolutely has verbal language. Pretty much I think that they're the first that we really see that has verbal language. To my understanding, I don't know if Homo habilis has verbal language. That might be something we do know. And I haven't looked into that. I will absolutely look into that. But when we look at that, we can see language, we can trace language. The other thing, and this one's huge, is that Homo erectus seems to have made it across water. We don't know how, but they have to have, there's just no other option. We see that the island of Flores in the Wallace Trench, which has never been above sea level in Indonesia. So this island has always been an island, right? Has Homo florensis on it. So to get to Flores Island to speciate into Homo florensis, they have to cross water. And just this year, we have found that there's another species on an island in the Philippines that Homo florensis or Homo erectus had to have made it to an island in the Philippines to get to speciate. And again, this is across the Wallace Trench, which again has never been above sea level. So we see that they absolutely had to have made it across water by bones. In the skeletal record, in the fossil record. And Lee Berger said something tonight that was just really brilliant, that really touched on something, is that a couple of years ago, there were more paleontologists in the field than there were skeletons in the field. And in the last 12 years, there has been such a boom of fossil record, of skeletons, of species within the field, that we now have quite a few, right? And I know even a couple years ago, we were talking about having very, very few. And now there seems to be this wealth. I think he was saying something like maybe there's like 16 alati. I don't remember what the exact word, the exact number was, but like, there's a lot. Like there's so much more within there and within the record and within the findings that we're looking at now that we're finding. And all this has to do with the new tools that are coming out. And all that has to do with Indigenous and Black voices entering the field and bringing new understanding into the field, right? So we do see that they make it across water by seeing bones in the fossil record, but we also have two new finds within the last 10 years. One is the Moyhill site in Australia that is 120,000 years ago. This is evidence of firecraft rock, evidence of fire itself, soot, and evidence of food items that look like they could have been broke open. Now, these are seafood items, shells. So the idea of the breakage of shells alone would not indicate hominin presence, but the firecracked rock is repetitive fire use, controlled fire, which is only Homo erectus and down, right? So it would absolutely indicate Homo erectus having made it to Australia and having probably speciated in Australia. We have some further evidence later on that we'll talk about. And then we see the Suruti Mastodon site at 130,000 years ago here in Turtle Island. And the Suruti Mastodon site is a juvenile mastodon bones. That's not what I was talking about. That was the Moyhill site I was talking about, Ducray, but watch the show. I'm telling you, it was, I should have watched it 3 days ago when it came out. I just got so busy and distracted. You're going to be interested. Anyways, so the Suruti Mastodon site is juvenile mastodon bones that are spiral fractured and fractured in ways that are only done when it is a fresh fracture or fresh bone, because the bone is still moist and wet, and you don't get these types of fractures in bones that are not moist and wet. So we also see in situ among the bones, in the stratified layer among the bones, we see tools, hammerstones and cobblestones. And what cobblestones and hammerstones are, cobblestone will sit on the ground and you put your bone on top of it and you take a hammerstone and you break your bone up. You have a large kill, and there's a lot of megafauna in this area. Like Turtle Islands was known for their megafauna, right? And so if you have this large kill and you know you're going to attract megafauna, you're going to extract as much as you can, as quick as you can. So you're going to strip all the meat, you're going to take the hide, and then you're going to start breaking up the bones as much as possible, the long bones, A, to get the marrow out, and B, because you're going to use this for tools. You're not going to use the stone tools that you have at this time to sew So what you're going to use is bone, and you're going to use bone for both needles and for awls, right? Because it's something that you can get into a fine enough sliver to be able to do this strong enough. And so we would absolutely see this as a deconstruction of the kill so that you can get as much of the kill away as possible before large predators come in. And this is 130,000 years ago in Turtle Island, completely indicative of Homo erectus making it here to Turtle Island. So these show that Homo erectus not only made it into the sites that we see fossils like Homo florensis and Homo lozonsis, but would have absolutely made it as far as Turtle Island and into Australia. Again, there's further evidence on both of these sites or both of these possibilities that I'll discuss later on when I discuss other species. So this really gives Homo erectus making across the globe with fire, with clothing, with language. We'll never really probably find, and I'm sure, you know, as was mentioned tonight, as new things are coming up, you know, as new understandings, you know, as Lee was stating, and the thing that you should all watch, you know, we didn't think that we were going to be able to find evidence of fire, but here's evidence of fire, right? And just the different way of looking to find the evidence, right? So there's possibility in the future that we will find different ways of looking that will give us the evidence. But currently, so anything that's wood or hide, which are the things that are going to be able to float in this time period, right? Or even reed. Maybe you are really good at weaving and you weave reed boats, which is an absolute possibility, right? Any of these things are going to be something that degrades fast, which is part of the beauty and the magic of them and part of the beauty and the magic of these communities, right? And so in the fact that they're going to degrade fast, what you're going to have to look for in the soil to find them is when you're looking at a stratified layer, as you're digging down, what it is you peel back a layer and you peel back a layer and you peel back a layer. And in each layer, what you're looking at is a difference in the soil, what the color of the soil is and what the content of the soil is, right? And so if you get down 3 layers and you see that it's light brown here and dark brown here, and you can trace this as an outline of a boat or a raft, right? And then carbon date it, then you could find whether or not you have a flotation device, right? But we're looking at 2 million years ago. So by then, how do you determine, right? Like how much of it is just a part of the soil itself? Anytime you see tree in the fossil record, you don't automatically assume tree and human, right? You don't automatically assume a human put this tree there. It's a tree. Trees happen naturally. So you would have to have some indication to like trace an outline, right? Something would have you go, oh, wait, that might be larger than that. So you'd have to have that too. And you just have to have the recognition. And unless we find maybe with the spectrometry that they're doing where they're, you know, analyzing layers, but that probably only goes so deep as well, right? So we'll see as things develop. Maybe they will find, you know, the ability to cross water and how this happened. But until they do, we just know it did. We just know it did. And it's amazing. So again, tonight's chat is going to be subscriber only on the comments. That does not mean that if you are here with positive questions or comments and you want to ask that you cannot. In Widda Ord is my YouTube channel, and I am live over there as well. And there are no blocks over there. You can go over there and talk if you want to. I'm kind of doing this as a safety measure to provide a safe space for discussion when it comes to people a little bit more. Well, okay. So first of all, I'm trying to make sure that, you know, as my subscribers are actually doing, like helping me do stuff to be able to move forward, that they're getting benefit from that. Right. But the subscriber only lives, I can't set them up very well. It won't let me announce them. So, it's hard to do and let them know. And I want to make sure that it's there. And so setting up my subscriber only lives as regular lives and just subscriber only chat is a pretty good way to kind of mediate that. I don't tend to leave chat open because it can get very trolly. I do tend to leave it or open it up for a while in my main lives so that people can ask questions. But if we're doing a subscriber chat only live, I won't be doing that. But to provide the ability in all of them to be able to follow along or comment, I am also doing them on YouTube, co-streaming it there so that you have the ability to, if you have a burning question and you need to know, you can go over there and ask. It's just kind of a pop-up blocker a little bit, it just kind of makes it that extra step. So it's just not as trolly. If you've been around here for a hot minute, you'll have seen that it gets very trolly within my space. And so we're just trying to provide ways that it doesn't get as trolly and still provide ways for everybody to have the ability to ask and to learn. And so I just want you all to know, as we're going along, I will not be opening up for comments tonight like I normally do, but I will be doing that again probably tomorrow. Well, in fact, it will be tomorrow. And if you're coming in, I watched Lieber's lecture or presentation on Homo naledi tonight. It was on YouTube. I took it and I put it on my link tree. It is the top link on my link tree. If this is something that you're involved in and you really enjoy, I challenge you tonight to go and watch that or to go and watch it over the next few hours. And tomorrow around noon Pacific Standard Time, I will be hosting a live that will allow comments from everybody. And I will allow people looking to discuss the findings to come up and chat. And we'll have a discussion about what these findings could possibly mean for our understanding of human evolution, because these findings actually are a really big challenge to our understanding of human evolution. And these findings actually, they're very beautiful findings. You're going to really enjoy them. So again, it's in the top link in the link tree in my bio. And you can go ahead and watch it tonight. If you have a conversation that you want to have on it and what it means, come back tomorrow. I will be particular about people I let in the box. I do have to state, just because of the fact that I'm very protective of my space. So I have to have kind of known you, or you have to give me some idea of your credentials and why, or something along those lines, right? There has to be some reason for me to feel safe with you. So just so you know, for the coming up in the box. But I challenge you to go ahead and watch it and come tomorrow and discuss what this means and the really amazing knowledge that this is really giving us. And Lee also mentioned that he's going to have about 3 more discoveries that are going to be coming out over the next year. They're currently in kind of the vetting process, which is something we talk about when we're talking about like the Indonesian pyramids, and how really I just would love to see the documents so that we can actually replicate the testing so that we can actually prove this to be true, right? Because that's an amazing idea. So they're going through that process to make sure that everything has been vetted, that everything has been doubled down, that the tests are replicated. And once that's all been done, then they'll publish. And he'll release these findings once they have that accountability in place, right? And so that's going to be really exciting too. So we'll have to watch for that. But tomorrow, I would absolutely love to have a discussion on what Lieberger's finds actually mean, like, and how much this really changes our perception of ourselves, right? Because if you go and watch it, this will change what you think about where we're at. And I really think from the way he was talking, because he stated the same thing, almost word for word, that the coming finds will also change what you're thinking of where we're at. So I really encourage you to go and watch that. And again, it's the top of the top link in the link tree in my bio. And we will have that around noon tomorrow PST. And I will send out a live notice so everybody knows. So that being said, and not seeing any questions from my subscribers who have probably watched this live 1,000 times, we're going to go into what the different speciations are from Homo erectus. Again, Homo erectus is who is behind me. They speciate in Africa, and they are the species that we descend from. And as they go around the world, they kind of create other species in the kind of exploration that they do. So we're going to talk first really about what is speciation. And when we look at this, we got to understand first what defines separate species. So things can look completely different, but if they can't breed, they are two separate species. Things can look completely the same, and if they can't breed, they're two separate species, i.e. a lion and a house cat, right? Things can look similar and have a recent common ancestor and be able to produce offspring sometimes. And sometimes those offspring are viable, but the vast majority of those offspring aren't able to have their own offspring, therefore not able to carry on in a mixture, right? And this is where we see two separate species still who have a recent common ancestor. This is a liger, a lion and a tiger, right? Every so often, one of the children of one liger, generally female, will have the ability to be fertile, but only with a person, or not person, from a cat from one of the parent species. And so we see with this that we're looking at two separate species with a recent common ancestor. So species themselves are two different groups who are unable to be able to breed. Whether the ability to breed has to do with you just don't fucking fit, right? You know, everybody can tell why an alligator and a human being cannot breed, right? I hope that that's a knowledge that's pretty common, right? Whether it's because you just don't fit, or whether because you do fit, but the offspring aren't viable, aren't fertile. Sometimes people like to take this to things like RH factor. And I want to double down as I do this, that RH factor has nothing to do with that. RH factor is more like an allergen than it is anything to do with any form of race, which is where people want us to take it. And they also want to take infertility there. And I would like to state that we're talking about when infertility happens within a species, what you see is that one of the couple is infertile, and the other person within the couple is able to go and be fertile with somebody else, right? You don't see that both are able to go and be fertile with somebody else generally, every once in a while, but that has to do with a match of genitals. But you generally see that at least one of them is able to go and be fertile with everybody else, and the one that is infertile is not, right? When you're looking at two separate species, the male Neanderthal and the female Homo sapien, the female Homo sapien is fertile with every Homo sapien. She's just not fertile with the male Neanderthal. The male Neanderthal is fertile with all the female Neanderthals. He's just not fertile with the female Homo sapien, right? And so this is where it is fertility. It is because of the fact that the two cannot mate with each other, not the fact that either one of them is infertile. That is the difference. So don't take it anywhere else than that. We see Neanderthal isn't discovered until 1850. And we see Neanderthal as the first that's discovered, but we see that at the time that Neanderthal is discovered, we still believe in Christianity very hardcore. And we believe that we're only 5,000 years old as a species. So Neanderthal is discovered in Neander Valley when they're doing construction, and the construction workers uncover a skull and they decide that somebody was killed, and they're trying to figure out who was killed. They send the skull off to a doctor. The doctor's like, well, that's a really weird morphology. He must have a disease process. It's not like he was killed. It's just a weird morphology. So they will think for a while it's a disease process. Takes about 10 years and a couple more finds for them to realize that now we have an entirely new species. And at this time, they still believe that evolution doesn't exist. There's still creation as science. Science is still creationist. At this time, we actually start to see that the theory of evolution is starting to be developed after we see Neanderthal. We see that Neanderthal itself is used to advance a very horrific theory that is embroiled within the theory of evolution. Now, this horrific theory starts in 1492, but it's rooted in something that goes back deeper. And what it's rooted in is othering. Othering starts at about 10,000 years ago, which is also when we see our first violence of human on human in the fossil record. And it starts with stratification of society. And it starts with the barbarians in the hills are evil, and I have to protect you against them. They're trying to steal your food. And then when everybody's in cities, it goes to that other city is less advanced than we are, and they're evil, and I have to protect them. Well, we got to pay the army and feed the army to protect you from them, when really it's me beating you, right? But it's that political need to create a different enemy than the 1% that's beating the fuck out of you at this time, right? And so we see it going from the barbarians in the hills to the other cities. When we see the advent of monotheism, the idea of a singular deity, and the application by Rome of that singular deity as a state religion, and we see God really starting to take over. We see this happen in 400, and in 600 we see Islam developing. Christianity really uses Christianity to other. It destroys God's chosen people, because Judaism is the chosen people of God. Christianity is not God's chosen people. It destroys God's chosen people, or tries to, and it goes after the Muslims. And it does this all on the idea that it's sinful, that they are sinful spaces, and that only Christianity understands sin, and only Christianity is not using sin. Well, Christianity's idea of sin is science and medicine. So you see that other spaces have science and medicine, like Africa, which is very Islamic at this point, though the indigenous spaces within Africa also have science and medicine at this point. Then you see that other spaces have science and medicine, where you see that Europe and any Christian country has stamped it out after 400. But the othering becomes the evil of the other religion at this time frame. When you see Europeans land in Turtle Island, what you see is they invade a land that is written about in all their documents, coast to coast, north to south, as an ecological haven. It's all a tended garden. The ecology of the indigenous people of Turtle Island is extremely advanced. The Europeans at this time are living in diseased cities. They are throwing their feces out the window. They are, children starving the streets, elders starving the streets. Everybody is, riddled with, either rickets or syphilis, because syphilis actually is found in 1300 in Europe. So you see this very backward civilization land on this very advanced civilization. Not only were they advanced ecologically, but they were also advanced medically and scientifically on Turtle Island. And their cities were clean. Their cities were a part of the land around them, right? So their cities weren't the dirty, horrible places that European cities were. But they can identify, Europe can, that the Turtle Island indigenous people aren't sinning, because they identify them as the children of God. They're and I hate the second word in this, and we should not be using it, but their term noble savage is seriously a statement of them being closer to God than anyone else. That's what they mean. And so you see that they cannot turn them into a sin. And so now they have to find something else to other. And as they're trying to justify the atrocity of stealing land through genocide and the atrocity of capturing a people in another land that they know is advanced, they start to look at race. And this is the first start of race. And when we see Neanderthal coming into play, we start to see the theory of evolution develop, and we start to see Europeans using the theory of evolution and early anthropology to create the theory of race to justify the atrocity that they have been committing, which we do go into entirely in our why is white conversation and other stuff. But I just want to go into how the theory of race is created a little bit as we talk about Neanderthal, because it should also be pointed out that when they find Neanderthal and when they create the theory of race, they initially use Neanderthal as a primitive. And they initially color Neanderthal as dark, and they initially attribute features that at the same time they are attributing to people of African descent. They're using the pseudoscience that they used to create race theory, which has been debunked, which we will go into further. But they use that pseudoscience that creates race theory, and they use Neanderthal along with that. And so you absolutely see that early on, you see anthropology deciding that primitiveness has to do with skin color. So I know that there are many people that come in and see Homo erectus and think that the skin color that's attributed to Homo erectus is some indication of primitiveness, and therefore some indication that people with dark skin are primitive. Homo erectus was not in any way, shape, or form primitive. Without Homo erectus, you would never be where you are today. Homo erectus gave you the fire that you use, right? Homo erectus gave you every tool. He gave you the foundation of everything you have, right? So this is not a primitive being. It's a foundational being to who you are. We do debunk race, and actually I'll go ahead and touch it here. And we debunk race the same way we understand speciation, the same way we understand where the origin of our species is, where the first of us are, and the same way we look at mitochondrial DNA. What happens is that the theory of race is created again with that justification need, like it is created to justify atrocity. And in its creation for justification of atrocity, it uses pseudoscience, it uses shade charts, it uses calipers to measure different measurements that really have nothing to do with where you live and really have nothing to do with your culture. Your nose can be the same in Sweden and in Africa and in Turtle Island and, you know, in China. Like, you can have the same features. Same thing with eyes. There are some qualities of eyes that you only get far north, and that is the inner fold, and that is because of sun reflecting off of snow. But all the things that we really see that really differentiates on any level are and how we have categorized race really is just skin, eye, and hair. And those things are about the latitude in which you live, and they're not about anything deeper. Whereas race theory tries to suppose that those things have a deeper meaning, and they do not. When the ability to test DNA comes into play, and when modern science looks at genetics and does the Human Genome Project, we are able to see that genetically we're more different within populations than we are between populations, which makes sense. You want to have a high amount of genetic diversity within your population, or you become inbred. That's why the Neanderthals die out, because they're inbred, because they have a lack of genetic diversity, right? So you have to have a genetic diversity within your population to not become inbred. I like to explain this using small numbers because it's easier. Say the entirety of the human genome is 50, say it's 100 genes. Say everybody gets 25 genes. Say you and your next door neighbor belong to two different family groups who have lived in this area, say in Asia for 100,000 years. Well, 50,000 years. Have been in this area of Asia for 50,000 years. You guys are, original inhabitants. You guys have always been there. And you have genes 1 through 25, and your next door neighbor has genes 75 through 100. That's their family genes. That's your family genes, right? Somebody in Africa is going to have genes 1 through 25. So you will have the same genes as somebody in Africa, more likely than you will have the same genes as your next door neighbor in Asia. We also are able to see with this that the population of the Khoisan people in Africa have the most genetic diversity. They have all the genes for the humans, which tells us that this is where we start, that this is the originating population of Homo sapien, that this is the descendant population, right? And we can also trace this with mitochondrial DNA, like the L-DNA. You can see that the L-DNA it's the earliest DNA. It's the first DNA line, right, that we have, and then it translates into others. So this is how we debunk race theory, but this is also how it is white supremacy and atrocity and justification by Europeans for that atrocity that creates race theory, right? It is manifest destiny. It is the genocides that create race theory. And these things are important even today. If you are in the United States, we have the highest maternal mortality rate of the industrialized world. And the vast majority of that is in Black women, because we have a medical field where a good portion of our medical field does not feel that Black women feel the same amount of pain that white women feel. And so a Black woman in labor is going to be told that she's not feeling jack shit, where a white woman feeling the same amount of pain is going to be given medicines and taken care of. And a Black woman is not allowed the awareness of her own body. And so we absolutely see that racism is very much a part of even the medical field that we have, even our childbirthing, right? And so, race has been debunked, and race created by my field and debunked by my field, and therefore we get to say does not exist. Racism still exists, and we need to work on getting rid of racism, and we need to work on understanding that the tone of your skin, the melanin content that you have, does not indicate anything deeper. But culture exists as well, which means that the tone of your skin can indicate your experience, especially within a colonial world. So culture is there, racism is there, race does not exist. Neanderthal, though, is the one that we really know the most about. And we have learned that our early assumptions of who Neanderthal were false. We do know that some Neanderthal have dark skin. There is a dark skin gene for Neanderthal, but for the vast majority, Neanderthal were light-skinned. What we see happen is that Neanderthal speciate specific for Europe because they speciate in Western Eurasia. And you see that Neanderthal is speciating in a time. Hello. Sorry. There's somebody over here. Hi. I'm kind of dual living. So if you're just stepping in over here, I'm also on TikTok. You see that Neanderthal is speciating in a time in Europe where there's a lot of cloud cover. There's still a lot of cloud cover in Europe, and they're speciating in a space that has a low sun amount, right? So when you see Neanderthal speciating in this space, what you see is Neanderthal speciates in this few ways that are pretty focused on this environment. One of those things first is that you see that Neanderthal species is kind of shorter and stockier than we do, or more compact than we do. They're not necessarily very short, but they're very compact. And what this is that your skin performs a few different functions. And one of these functions is heat dissipation, the ability to expel heat from the body, and heat retention, the ability to hold heat from the body. And when you have less skin, it retains your heat better. And so you're going to see that that short kind of compact gives that ability to hold that heat in. You also see the speciation with light skin in Neanderthal. And again, you see that speciation because of a lack of sun. You see the need to get as much vitamin D as possible from the sun. You can get some from your environment, but not enough. And you need to get enough from the sun as you can. There have been some recent studies that indicate that light skin might also have some advantages to heat retention, but it's one study, and I haven't gotten enough information and seen confirmation for me to really double down on that. We also see that Neanderthal speciates with light color eyes. And the reasoning for this is that light eyes work very well in a low light environment. But you also see that if you try to take light eyes into a highlight environment, let me see if I can set this up to where it's actually not looking sideways at one instead of the other. You see that in a low light environment, that light eyes have a tendency to, you see in a highlight environment that light eyes have a tendency to be painful. I have gray eyes. If I go out in the sun with gray eyes, it hurts, right? And it can lead to headaches. You are kind of sun blind. You have to squint a lot of the time. And so you see that Neanderthal speciates with eyes that see better in a low light environment, which are light color eyes. You also see that Neanderthal speciates with a larger, not just nose itself, but the cranial capacity behind the nose to help with their heat. And what you see with this is when you're looking at a Homo sapien, we often think, well, Neanderthal having a big nose. I mean, you know, in hot environments, big noses help for us. And they might. I'm not sure if we have studies that prove that. But what we look at is the fact that all Homo sapiens' noses, skull structure really is very similar. So the behind your nose, if you were to actually feel it as a Homo sapien, you see that the bone is kind of protruding here. And there's actually a little bit more of a bone that we don't see in skulls usually that comes down just a little bit. It's just so thin and fine that it dissolves really quick. And then you see that behind that, you have two very long, narrow slits that really go along the shape of your nose itself. And they're just really long, narrow slits here and here on either side. And there's even a split between them. But really, this wideness here is not where your nostrils opening is, right? The bone is really in from there, and it's really here. With Neanderthals, what we see is that the nostril opening comes out a lot wider. We see that the brow ridge brings the top of the nose out more as well, but we see that instead of these long, narrow slits here, we see that the nose slits shape here goes more like this. It's very broad and wide. And behind that, because they have this mid-face prognosis where the front of their face kind of sticks out like this, behind that, what you're seeing is that you are getting this, the sinuses behind your nose and the sinuses that we all have within our head are kind of like a crab's body or like, a shell. There's several chambers that all have air passages through, right? And so if you're bringing in this air into these large nostril cavities, into this large sinus cavity, and you're cycling the air through this, it's heating before it hits the brain. And so you're not getting brain freeze. So you see Neanderthal speciate with these very specific speciations for cold weather. A few other things that you see with Neanderthal very throughout their entire time as a species, which is about 570,000 years with our newest information. Throughout their entire time as a species, they're a small species. They're very genetically undiverse. They're very genetically narrow. And so there's never more than like 500,000 of them as a species whole, we estimate. We also see that they've always had a tool complex. They were really quick to move beyond the Acheulean hand axe complex into a new tool complex, and they absolutely have their own tool complex. We also see that they are wearing clothing, they are using fire, they're doing all the things that we would associate anywhere else. We also start to see medicine usage within Neanderthal. We see that there is traces of herbs within the dentition and Neanderthal teeth that you are bitter herbs that you're not going to use in cooking, and they have no caloric value. So it's not something that you're just going to eat, but you're also going to use for specific medicine or specific disease processes that we still use them for today. And in some cases, we can actually correlate with the skeleton itself. Later on, towards the end of Neanderthal, we start to see cave art. There are our first cave artists. We see cave art about 60,000 years ago in France. It might be like 65,000 years ago. And I know that there's one that's more recent that they even pushed back the time a little bit further on. And I just don't remember which one it was or the timeline. And we also start to see our burial of dead, though recent findings challenges that this is the first start of our burial of dead. But in Neanderthals, we start to see them burying their dead roughly like 60,000 years ago, 70,000 years ago. And we still aren't positive this is evidence of burial of dead. We just think that it looks like evidence of burial of dead. So we see that Neanderthal really has a lot of the same capacities we have, but they speciate in an entirely different way for their region, right? We see that at the same time, Homo erectus and the subspecies of Homo erectus heidelbergensis is speciating in Africa. And we see the speciation in Africa about 300,000 years after the speciation of Neanderthal. They're about 300,000 years old when Homo sapien comes on the scene. And when Homo sapien comes on the scene 300,000 years ago, they've already lived the entire lifespan that we lived now, right? So Neanderthal really outlasted us already, has outlasted us already. When we see Homo sapien descending from Homo erectus in Africa, we see Homo sapien descending from erectus with darker skin, darker eyes, and with a couple other very specific advantages. So we see tall and lean in the early Homo sapiens, and we see this tall and lean because what we're looking at is a broader expanse of skin over a greater space. And so you give the ability to dissipate heat again, right? Just like you see with Neanderthals, that shorter, more compact gives the ability to retain heat. You see with Erectus that taller and leaner gives the ability to dissipate heat, right? And so that dissipation of heat is really imperative in where you see sapien speciate at. And then you also see with sapien that they speciate with darker skin because of the sun content. Darker skin has the advantage of blocking some of the UV rays. I want to double down and make specific that everybody knows that just because you have dark skin does not mean you do not burn. Many people with very dark skin can actually burn very badly. You just might not notice it because all you see is red, white burn, right? And people who with dark skin can absolutely bruise as well. So you have more protection from UV. You can still burn, absolutely, but you have more protection from UV. You're less susceptible to skin cancer from sun rays. And you also see that the dark skin helps prevent from an overdose of vitamin D, because you can absolutely overdose on vitamin D, just like you need enough. You do not want too much. We also see that dark eyes are a speciation for the high light that they are dealing with at this time. We're talking about an area that sun is beating down all the time on you, which is also part of another speciation that we see. We recently had a Black anthropologist who also works with hair actually do a study. And the study that they did showed that 4C hair comes from it's a species adaptation because of the environment for our species. And what it is that it creates this kind of barrier over the top of your head. If you have 1A hair, like I do, and you go out in the sun, that exposed scalp is going to burn. But if you have 4C hair, it creates this kind of solid cover. Underneath that solid cover, it creates a lattice work that allows airflow. And just like the large nose and protruding middle face within Homo neanderthalis gives it the ability to warm the air before it gets to the brain, the lattice work of the 4C hair that Homo sapiens speciates with gives it the ability to cool the air so you're not boiling the brain. So it moves air in this lattice work over the top of the scalp. This is a recent find, and I'm in love with it. It's fascinating what we have done with our bodies to be able to live and to be able to move about, right? And so you can see where Neanderthal is speciating in one way due to their environment, and Homo sapien is speciating in another way due to their environment. Neanderthal and Homo sapien meet and live together in the Levant starting in about 150,000 years ago. And Neanderthal and Homo sapien, Neanderthal being driven down by ice ages in Europe, and Homo sapien being the exploratory people that we've always moving up, we see that Neanderthal and Homo sapien actually lived side by side in the Levant for about 100,000 years. We do see that indigenous Australians make it out of the Levant at 70 or into Australia at 70,000 years ago, 60 to 70,000 years ago, but we don't see any other Homo sapiens making it out of the Levant until 50,000 years ago. So we live in the Levant, Neanderthal side by side for 100,000 years. And it gives us quite a lot. It gives us an advancement in our own tools, gives them an advancement, and gives us the genomes that we have for Neanderthal and pretty much everybody on this planet, except for two spaces in Africa. The two spaces in Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA have what we call ghost species, which we will get into a little bit more later. But having the Neanderthal DNA in Africa does not indicate that Neanderthal ever made it into Africa. What this indicates is that when Homo sapien and Neanderthal are living side by side together in the Levant in these two caves that are really a 5-minute walk from each other, and they're intermixing, they're both going home. This is a long period of time. This is 100,000 years. You're going to live in this area and you're going to migrate back to home. You're going to go back to see your grandparents. You're going to go back to see your ancestors. And as you go home, you're going to take these genetics with you and your children and your grandchildren. Excuse me. And so you see that Neanderthal never comes into Africa and Homo sapien doesn't make it out to Africa until later. But you absolutely see that the genes for Neanderthal make it into the spaces in Africa that have not made it out of Africa, with the exception of those two spaces that have the ghost species within them. So when you see this, you see that, or when we see this, we see that Neanderthal really continues on in us. We see them in our DNA. They actually state that there's more Neanderthal DNA on the planet today than there ever was during the 570,000 years of their existence. Because again, we think that there is only about 500,000 as a species whole during the entirety of their existence. They are the first we find in the fossil record. And again, they change our entire perception of humanity. They change our entire perception of everything. They give us basis to the theory that we evolved, right? About 1890 is when we find Erectus. And we find habilis sometime in then, but we believe that Erectus and habilis are before us. We think even at this time that for a while, we think that we descend from Neanderthal, and then we think that we must have known Neanderthal and that we descend from Erectus. And we don't equate Erectus as having descended from a Neanderthal. It's not until later that we start to realize. So in 2003, we have our next discovery of another human species that we live alongside. And again, Homo means human. So any Homo species is a human species. And we see that Homo florensis comes onto the scene in 2003. And this is really an amazing find in so many different ways. And again, if you're going to go watch Lee Berger's presentation on the Lottie, he actually touches on the small brains within Homo florensis, which is pretty interesting. But Homo florensis, when we see Homo florensis, we see what we end up dubbing our hobbit species because they're not taller than 3'5", and they actually have large feet. They're a little bit more Australopithecine, but they're very hominin too. They have small brains, but they have small bodies, right? And when we see this, we realize that this is another Homo species, right? Not that they're completely more Australopithecine like we see in a later species, but that they, I think they have a little bit different proportions. And so we see that this is an entirely new species that we must have lived with. And we start to get this entirely new idea. And this is in 2003. After this, and around this time, actually, we have this invention that happens called PCR. And PCR is polymerase chain reaction. And Svante Pablo, who's a Swedish geneticist, actually won the Nobel Prize this year for inventing PCR. And what PCR is it takes DNA strands and it replicates them so you can test them. Most people don't know, but when you're testing ancient DNA, you're destroying the entire product to test it. And when you test DNA strands themselves, you destroy the DNA strands to test them. So if you are living and they take your saliva, they're going to destroy your saliva. But as long as you're alive, your body replicates your DNA. When you die, that replication process stops. and you enter into something called a half-life phase. And a half-life phase happens for everybody, or not for everybody, for every element. All elements have half-life. And what a half-life is the rate of time it takes the substance or the chemical, or in this case, the DNA, to degrade by half. So if your half-life is a day and you have 100 strands of DNA, and again, I use small numbers because it just makes it easier, then your half-life is going to, again, a day, and you have 100 strands of DNA. The first day when you die, you start your day with 100 strands. Halfway through the day, or, during the day, you lose half of your DNA. You lose 50 of these strands, and you end your day at 50. Start the next day at 50 strands, and you lose half of this, which means you lose 25 strands, and you end the day with 25 strands. Starting your third day with 25 strands, you lose half, 12.5, and you end the day with 12.5. So this is how half-life works as a rate of decay. And you see with DNA, like everything else, it has a half-life. And like everything else, certain environments can extend this half-life, and certain environments can make this worse. Environments that can extend this are extremely cold environments, extremely cold and dry environments, like Otzi the Iceman. And you see this will maintain DNA longer as well. We actually just pulled a mastodon out of a glacier in Serbia or Siberia that they were able to retrieve million-year-old mastodon full genome from. And so we see that in extremely cold and dry environments, DNA can last up to 1 million years. We also see that fully submerged, like in a bog or underneath a lake, you're going to see that DNA will last longer, just like bog bodies. The body itself will last longer. You see that extremely hot and extremely moist environments will degrade DNA faster. When you're DNA testing ancient DNA, what you have to do is take a piece of the bone or whatever you have, if it's Otzi, maybe skin, and you have to destroy it. You grind it up, you put a solution in it, you put that whole thing in a tube, and you spin it out with centrifuge, and you tease out these particles of DNA. And you're lucky if you get a couple particles of DNA. And a couple particles of DNA is not enough to test. Not only that, but any testing of it destroys it, right? So you're destroying it, and you can't even get a full test. So you can't even run, it's not like you're even running this test. So PCR gives you the ability to take that strand of DNA, that 2 strands of DNA, and replicate it into the millions. So roughly the same time we actually see Homo florensis come into the scene, so roughly 20 years ago, is when Svante actually develops PCR. When PCR pops into the screen, when PCR pops into the scene, we start to DNA test everything we can. We see that BJ581, the greatest warrior that we've ever seen in Scandinavia, buried with a full armory, a stallion and a mare, and with a full taffel set, which is indicative of a rank and is the only warrior we've ever seen buried with a full taffel set. Turns out to be a woman by DNA. We see that the Scythian warrior graves turn out to be female, and we realize that the Amazons existed in the Scythians. And we, in DNA testing everything, go to the Denisovia cave in Russia, where we have this wealth of Neanderthal bones, and decide that we're going to see whether or not they mix and match, right? We test this fingertip, this phalange, and when we do this test on this fingertip, we develop or discover a whole new species. We discover Homo denisovian. We don't have a full fossil of Homo denisovian yet. We have a piece at the base of their skull. We do believe that they had language. We have a jaw. We know that they did not have, so far to my understanding, the gap in the back teeth that other species have that we don't have. We do not have a gap between our farthest back molar and the curve of our mandible, whereas like Neanderthal and Erectus have this gap, and it doesn't look like Denisovian has this gap. We've also found our first half of 2 different species. So we found Denny in this cave, and Denny is a 13-year-old that is half Neanderthal and half Denisovian. She had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovian father, and I think it's about 90,000 years old, but sometimes the dates get switched in different articles. And so that's what I think, but I'm not sure. But this is from a 6-inch thigh bone, right? So when we find the ability, or when Svante Pablo gives us the ability to do PCR, to test ancient DNA. We start to find this new species. After Denisovian, we found Naledi. And again, Lee Berger's YouTube on Naledi is at the top of my link tree, in my bio on TikTok, in my bio on YouTube. I challenge everybody to go and watch that tonight, to go and watch it over the next day, and take a look at the things that Lee is talking about Naledi. This really challenges our perception of ourselves. This really challenges our perception of where we are. And this really challenges our knowledge of history and evolution. This is an extremely impactful find. And not only that, but what he is talking about is an extremely impactful find. He's talking about there's 3 more things that are going to have even greater impact on us. He has already given us this great impactful weight, and he is stating that there are 3 more things that they're currently vetting that they will be releasing over the next year. So that is in the top of the link tree in my bio, and I encourage everybody to go and watch it tonight or tomorrow, and we will hold a live at noon tomorrow, Pacific Standard Time, and we'll probably 12:30, and we'll go into the discussions of what this possibly means for us, where this possibly puts us as a species, or how this changes us. So when we find Naledi, what we have been talking about, I will continue to talk about. What we find is a species that seems to have gone 3 different ways in evolution, and really teaches us for the first time that evolution isn't linear on a scale that really anybody can see. Because before this, evolutionary biologists, people who studied genetics would have told you that evolution isn't linear. Okay, I'm really trying to learn how to get this set up, and I'm going to be changing cameras on the computer tomorrow anyways. And so I'm trying to set it up as the dual hosting and be able to see them both. Sorry, I've got to kind of finagle it around. Anyways, so when we see Naledi, what we see is that what we've known as biologists and as evolutionary biologists and as evolutionary or studies of evolution, is that evolution isn't linear, but we see this really clearly displayed in one singular species in a way that we really never see it before. And what we see with Naledi is that from the L-spine down in the lower body, you see that Naledi has the same body that we have. They're expediently bipedal. There's a little bit more curve to the feet, which I found out tonight, that you don't necessarily see within us, but otherwise they're even more like us in the lower body than Homo erectus. And so we see that from the L-spine down, there is this expedient bipedalism that you see in Homo erectus and within Homo sapien. What you see from the L-spine up is Australopithecine, like Lucy. You see a being who is still arboreal. They have an arboreal shoulder girdle, so they still have the ability to swing. And you also see that the hands, the arms are a little bit longer. The hands, the fingers are curved. The phalanges are curved. And in Homo sapien, you'll see that our fingers are flat like this, right? But within Naledi, you see that this flat takes a curve, a bend, like this in the fingertips, and they actually have longer thumbs. This gives them a better ability to grasp and to therefore be arboreal. We also see that there's a smaller brain case like Australopithecine, but this is where it gets different. When we look at the brain of Homo sapien, modern human, what we see is that early Homo sapiens have a brain like Homo erectus, Homo neanderthal, like all others in its structure. You see differences in cubic centimeter size capacity, right? But you don't see differences in structure until about finalized at about 40,000 years ago in Homo sapien, right? This is something that all indications show would have started before this, most likely at least, 100,000 years ago, just because of some other indications that we have and that Naledi actually brings into play with this. But it would have finalized at 40,000 years ago. So all early hominins have a brain like this being your forehead, this being where your spine is, and this being where the back of your head is. And you can see that the back of the head is just this kind of long skull out of, right? It just kind of sticks out. And you see this in all of it. In early or in modern Homo sapiens sapien, what you see is that this has kind of curved down, and it gives us the globe or lobe shape to our brains. It gives us a globe shape that is an ability to develop lobes within. With Naladi, you see this brain shape. Naladi is 335 to 200,000 years ago. We don't see this in us until 150,000 years after Naladi is dead. So Naladi has this extreme leap forward in the shape of their brain. And that leap forward in the shape of their brain actually really correlates into some other things, which we have touched a little bit on. Lee absolutely touches more on and doubles down on. Naladi buried their dead, and they are the first that we see that bury their dead. We do not see any other species burying their dead. Hello. Oh, have fun with that. 1 second, guys. It seems that there is also trolls. There we go. I don't know how to block. Sorry, I'm in YouTube as well tonight, and there we go. I'm trying to figure out YouTube chat, and I have sexy girls wanting me to send them pics in YouTube chat. It's a great night, right? So we see that with Naladi, you see this great step forward, right? You see these things being used that you really don't see until much later in Homo sapiens, and you don't see in any others. And we've touched on this a little bit, and this is what Lee Berger is going to touch on more. We also see a use of fire in a way that we don't see a use of fire being able to be tracked really in any other species after or before. And so again, I challenge you to watch it and come back tomorrow and we'll talk in depth about it. But you see some really fucking fascinating things about Naladi that is really going to make some serious changes over the next couple of years. We see Naladi in about 2012, 2013. And we do have another live that we've done with one of the people that discovered Naladi, a geologist named Gideon. And we have that live uploaded to my YouTube channel, so you can watch it on my YouTube channel if you're over here on my YouTube channel. If you're over on TikTok, my YouTube channel is in the link tree in my bio, like all of my sources, and like Lee Berger's presentation. You can watch you can watch one of the people who actually found Naladi talk about the finding of Naladi. After we found Naladi, we found Longi, and we find Longi in the Long caves in China. I believe it's Malaysian, but I'm not sure. Long means dragon. And so initially we call this our dragon man. We find only a skull cap of Longi. And since we find only a skull cap of Longi, we find that we're not sure if Longi is Longi or Denisovian, because we haven't found a skull of Denisovian yet. We don't have a fossil type for Denisovian yet. And so currently they're doing DNA testing on Longi. DNA testing on Florensis doesn't work. Florensis is a species that's in a hot and humid environment. And so trying to DNA test has not worked. We do know that Florensis lives from about 100,000 years ago to about 12,000 years ago. But there are some recent evidence of an anthropologist who's a doctor in anthropology who is studying Florensis, having recorded sightings by locals within the last 50 years, which means that there's a possibility that the Florensis is actually still out there, that is currently being studied in the Isle of Flores. But we won't be getting DNA from Florensis unless we actually find an alive Florensis or a very recent Florensis, because of the rate of decay of DNA in a hot and humid environment. We do not have DNA on Naladi. Again, hot environments, and there's moisture in the cave that Naladi was found in. Now, that was the information on DNA for the original Naladi finds. They have found more Naladi. And again, like I said, Lee Berger said that there's like 3 huge pieces of information that's going to be coming out that takes further testing. So maybe some of that is DNA. Like maybe there is some double down, right? So we'll see on that, and that might be very impactful. But currently, we don't have DNA for Naladi. We're testing Longi. And around the same time that Longi comes out, just a few months later, we see Homo luzonensis come out. And we see Homo luzonensis in the island of Luzon in the Philippines. Just like we see Homo florensis species, it is a dwarf species, a hobbit species. We see Homo florensis using island dwarfism to become what we are calling a dwarf species. Their height is about 4'5" to our knowledge now, and we haven't really got a lot of dating on them yet. Like we've only found like one or two, I think, like not a whole lot. So we really haven't got a lot of information. But again, because of the area, it might be hard to find DNA. But we will be able to date and maybe find more finds. So these are the 6 different species that we see within the fossil record so far. When we look at how these species are mixing with us, we can not only trace our migration out of Africa, but we can trace a few other things. Sorry, I feel like there's a hair somewhere on my face and it gets really weird for me. We can trace that we are mixed with Neanderthals, and we can see where we lived in 2 caves side by side for 100,000 years. So we know that we're mixing in this time period. And again, because not all breedings are fertile, it takes quite a bit of breeding to get the presence of Neanderthal DNA that we see in Homo sapien DNA at all today. The only real timeline I have, I'll tell you later in a couple of minutes, but you'll understand. But we see Neanderthal DNA everywhere except for 2 spaces in Africa. And the 2 spaces in Africa that we don't see Neanderthal DNA, we see 3 ghost species. Here's where I'm going to tell you what ghost species are, because I know you're dying to know. So ghost species are species that we see the fingerprint of, or a tiny bit of their genome in our DNA. So we have this like hint of them. We know that there's this species, but because we have just a tiny bit of their genome and not the whole genomic, we don't know who this species is. We haven't found them in the fossil record. We don't have DNA of them. We don't have a genome of them. So they are a ghost species. We have 3 ghost species in Africa in the 2 spaces that we don't see Neanderthal DNA. We also see within our DNA Denisovian, but we only see Denisovian in specific spaces within our DNA. And the spaces within our DNA that we see this are in East Asia, the islands of the South Pacific, Australia, which it's either one of the islands in the South Pacific, Papua, and it's not Papua New Guinea, but it's another Papuan island, or Australia that have the highest amount of Denisovian DNA. And we also see Denisovian DNA in indigenous turtle islanders prior to colonization, so pre-colonized indigenous turtle islanders. And this indicates that we see this travel through East Asia from Africa for indigenous turtle islanders. Currently, because of the Denisovian DNA and because of Austrasian DNA within indigenous pre-colonized turtle islanders, we are actually looking at a southern boat route, which many indigenous people have had an understanding of for quite some time. And so the fact that we're actually looking at it in the field of anthropology and archaeology is actually a really cool look forward. We have 33,000-year-old finds in Turtle Island that are Homo sapien that debunk the land bridge theory and debunk Clovis first. Not meaning that nobody came over on the land bridge, but meaning that the original inhabitants or the first inhabitants of Turtle Island did not come over on a land bridge because they were here before the land bridge opened its ice-free corridor between 18 and 15,000 years ago. So these are 2 species that we see in the fossil record that we see in people today. Outside of these 2 species and the 3 ghost species that we see in people in Africa that we do not see Neanderthal DNA in, we see a ghost species in Australia. And again, I was talking earlier about the Moy Hill site in Australia being indicative of Homo erectus having actually made it to Australia. This is a 120,000-year-old site. Sapien is not out of Africa at this point, not out of the Levant area at this point. They've barely made it into the Levant area at this point. You're definitely going to see that anything at this point that is a hominin site is going to be a Homo erectus site. We also see that the site is fire-cracked rock and the evidence of controlled fire along with food product shells. The shells being broken is something that could happen in 1,000 different ways. That in and of itself is not indicative. What is indicative of or what is indicative, is having the fire-cracked rock. Fire-cracked rock comes from the repetitive healing and cooling of rock. It causes the expansion of the moisture within to cause it to crack. Usually we see this when using it for boiling. Like if you have a basket that you've woven, you'll put water in that basket and you'll heat the stone on the fire, and then you'll use a couple sticks and drop the stone in the water, and it'll cause the water to boil. This is how we boiled things before we had the ability to have steel pots. So we see that fire-cracked rock, and we see the evidence of controlled fire. Both of those things are Homo erectus things. And so that means that this is a descendant of Homo erectus, right? Or a speciesization of Homo erectus. This is Moyhil site in Australia, Moyjil. And again, we see that there is a ghost species in Indigenous Australians. And so that ghost species within Indigenous Australians would be most likely whoever this species is that erectus species into that we see with the Moyhil site again at 120,000 years ago. In Turtle Island indigenous DNA, we also see a ghost species. And again, we have the 130,000-year-old Cerruti Macedon site. The Cerruti Macedon site is juvenile mammoth bones that are juvenile mammoth bones that are cracked in ways that they're obviously cracked when they're moist or wet. They were fresh bones. This is a fresh kill being processed. There's spiral fracturing, which only happens when you twisted a bone and when it is a wet bone or within the body. This is actually what they call an abuse fracture. And so we see that, and we also see that in situ among the bones is hammerstones and cobblestones. A cobblestone is what you lay on the ground, and then you put the bone on it, and then you use a hammerstone to break it. And so with the hammerstones and cobblestones, the breakage pattern on those are similar to cracking fresh bone. Breakage pattern on the bone is all similar to being smashed with the hammerstones and cobblestones. This is, I have killed this big mammoth, and there's a lot of megafauna that's hunting me out here because megalofauna predators are smelling this from 100 miles away. I'm going to get this shit out of here as fast as I can. And I'm going to take the fatty, rich content of the bone marrow from within the bones, and I'm going to break up the bones so that I can get needles and awls, because again, Homo erectus has claws. So anybody who species from Homo erectus is also having claws. So this Cerruti Macedon site at 130,000 years ago in Turtle Island is absolutely a Homo erectus descendant site. And this would absolutely be the ghost DNA that we see in Turtle Island indigenous people. So this is the different ghost DNA that we see at this point. There was an article that came across recently of evidence of ghost DNA in Europe. I do know that there is evidence of ghost DNA in Neanderthal and Denisovian of a species, but we don't see that species within us. And I'm trying to look deeper into the article on the ghost DNA in Europe and see if it is that ghost DNA or if it is actually a ghost DNA within sapien species in Europe, which would give us yet another ghost DNA, taking us from 6 ghost species to 7 ghost species. Currently within Homo sapiens, we see 2 species that we found in the fossil record, Denisovian and Neanderthal, and 5 species that we have not found in this fossil record, 5 ghost species, giving us a total of 7, right? 7 species in total within us, which leads me to the posit that as a species, when we see something new, we don't fight it, we fuck it. We like to breed, and we like things that are unusual. We like things that are different. We like things that don't look like us. Opposites still attract. And so every time we met a different species in our history, we ended up having sex with them. We see that the Neanderthals and the Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens spent 100,000 years side by side in the Levant. And we see a high presence of DNA in Neanderthal DNA and Homo sapiens. We know by estimate that the Denisovian DNA within Turtle Islanders at 0.02 to 0.03% indicates a 10,000 year period of intermixing. To have that amount of DNA in the pre-colonial finds that they have, because they get this from pre-colonial finds. So with that, that indicates 10,000 years. at 0.02 to 0.03, which is like the least amount that we really have of any other species. So if you've got 5% or 6%, that's like 100,000 years of interbreeding, right? And so we absolutely see that not only did we interbreed with these other species, but we spent a good deal of time with these other species. We see that when we met up with these other species, we made these great leaps and advances forward within our own species. And that's really what our different species are. That's really what the different species that come from Homo erectus are. Again, usually I will open up the comments in TikTok for a few minutes. But again, tonight we're doing a subscriber only comments in TikTok. I do have my YouTube open and I am streaming over on YouTube as well. So if you would like to comment and you cannot comment in here, please feel free to find the YouTube in the link tree in my bio, or just go to Widda in YouTube. That's my YouTube, same thing. So that you can comment. I'm just trying to keep safety limitations in space. And tomorrow, like I said, I challenge everybody to go and watch Lee Berger's, presentation on his findings with Naladi. And then tomorrow we'll come in and we'll have a discussion about this and what this really means for this difference in our understanding of us as evolutionary beings and our understanding of our own evolution. We touched on Erectus. We've touched on how race theory was debunked. We've touched on what science is and how everybody had science all the way back to Erectus and how we are very scientific beings. So now I want to touch on a couple things that are uniquely Homo sapien. We often think that we have a few things that are innate about us. And many of these things that we often think are innate about us are very nasty things, right? We innately think that we're fighting some inner war, an inner struggle to be nice to people, to not harm other people. In the fossil record, we don't see human-on-human violence until roughly 10,000 years ago. We do see one thing that could be supposited as evidence of human-on-human violence at about 20 to 30,000 years ago, and that is a spear point in somebody's thigh. Now, yes, absolutely, that could have happened in a violent action of one human against another, but it could absolutely also have happened in a case of a hunting accident or accidentally stabbing myself while I'm flint napping, right? So this is not a confirmed indicative of human-on-human violence. But at 10,000 years ago in Kenya, we see a massacre. And at 8,000 years ago in Sakata in Egypt, we see 2 skeletons with 21 points in them. So these are our 2 earliest sites of violence. The massacre that we see in Kenya is 8 people. There are no teenagers within the massacre. There are adults and there are small children. And there is one pregnant woman who was tied into a squatting kind of fetal position before she died. And so this is the thought that they took over an entire group and massacred everybody, but the teenagers and took the teenagers with them are not. I think it's like preteen, area. Like they have some late teenagers and they have some young children, but like in a certain space. So this is our first indicative of a massacre of any human-on-human violence, and this is 10,000 years ago. We don't see the rise of stratification in societies as agricultural cities until around this time as well. When we see Western agriculture and the rise of cities and stratification within society is really where we start to see the idea of othering, right? Before this, really every time we see a different species, what we do is, like I said, we fuck it. We don't fight it. We have no need to other. We have no need to hate. We have enough. We have enough. And so we like to think of ourselves as a species as being violent. And we like to think of ourselves as a species as being aggressive. And we like to think of ourselves as a species as being locusts, as devouring. Hey, Mean. As devouring. I'm over on YouTube as well. I have turned on subscriber only comments within the live just to kind of, well, there's a few reasons. One, benefit for subscribers and without having a subscriber only live itself. and to kind of create a level of balance. And instead of turning them on tonight, which I'll be doing tomorrow, I'm just leaving them on subscriber only. I am over on YouTube though. If you want to comment, if you have input, I know you always have valuable input. And I don't want to block people from having questions or input. I'm just trying to create layers in space because anybody, including you, me, because I know anybody who's in here who has seen how it can get very trolly. And so this just kind of gives that layer in space. Well, giving me the ability to keep a discussion going as well, right? So when we see us, and we see us as being innately evil, innately locusts, innately fighting our demons, right? Fighting our inner demons, original sin, all of these ideas. When you see these things as innately, you can't change them. How can you change the color of your eyes? How can you change the structure of your skeleton? How can you change what is innately you, what you are destined to be, what you're born with, right? So when you see yourself as innately having these negativities, you see that it is this impossible thing to overcome, right? You see that you can fight against it, right? You have the belief that you're trying to constantly work against being evil, right? But you also see that you can never reach the level of protection that you're supposed, or perfection that you're supposed to reach, right? Because you're not innately perfect, right? So you see that there's this constant strive to be and do something that you can never reach and can never attain. Not only that, but again, if you see yourself as innately evil, you don't see the ability to change something that's innately about you. And so it's very important to me to point out the things that are innate about us, the things that we know drive us biologically, the things that we know we are required to have as a species. And one of those things is mandatory midwifery. We are one of only 2 species that has ever had mandatory midwifery. And the only other species being Neanderthal. This has to do with the ratio of the brain size in our neonates to the pelvic outlet within our hips. And what we see is that when you have a brain in a head that's shaped like this, right? And you have a pelvic outlet that is shaped like this, that actually is tilted in the body like this, that when you're giving birth to a baby whose head is shaped front to back longer rather than side to side longer, whereas your pelvic outlet is shaped side to side longer rather than front to back longer, that you actually have to turn the baby in the process of birthing in the birth canal. So human infants, Homo sapien infants, are actually born facing backwards at the start. And you have to do this quarter turn in the birth canal to get them to where they're kind of sideways so that you can bring the head out through the passage of the birth canal, through the bone structure. Because again, it's shaped like this and tilted, right? And the baby's head is shaped like this. So you have to tilt it like this. And then you have to turn it again another quarter to take the head that is front to back like this and the shoulders that are side to side like this so that the shoulders can go through, right? And so you see that you actually have to turn a neonate a couple times to deliver with a Homo sapien. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to every rule. Small-brained baby, or not small brain baby, small head, small size of a baby. Like some children are born very small. Absolutely, you can absolutely give birth to a small child without having to have assistance because you don't have the difficulty passing through. You can absolutely, there are women who are flexible enough to be able to reach down, though that's still a challenge. A lot of times we've all heard stories about, or a lot of times you've heard stories about, women in Asia maybe who give work while they're working, right? But that's still communities of women out within the work environments that they're in. They're helping them give birth. It's not that you see that women are giving birth alone. So we see that mandatory midwifery means that we have to have community. We can't just have sex and go off on our own and have a baby. We must have somebody else there with us. Oftentimes we talk about our biological imperative to breed, right? And everybody wants to have this thought process that everybody has this biological imperative to breed, but the biological imperative to pump, pass does not actually continue the species. We are the only species that has 5 life stages from neonate to adult. Not even Neanderthal had 5 life stages from neonate to adult. It is thought that that is why we have the brains that we have, because we have this extended period of brain development in different stages that focuses on different things. And because we have this extended period of brain development, our brains have the capacity to understand more. When you have no period of brain development or a small period of brain development, once your brain has finished developing, you can still learn new things. You know, you can absolutely teach an old dog new tricks, but it becomes a little bit more solidified. And if you are at a short period of time, and therefore a lack of brain development of extensive pumping full of information, from neonate to adult, then you're not going to have the malleability and the ability to think outside the box that we do. It is having this extensive infancy, extensive toddlerhood, extensive childhood, extensive post-adolescence that gives us the brains that we have. But to get there, you need to have more than your mama. You just do, right? So it is not your biological imperative to knock somebody up. If you don't stick around and raise that child's not going to make it to the next generation. So there's no biological imperative, right? If your biological imperative is a continuation of the species by spreading your seed, if just spreading your seed alone does not actually ensure that the next generation is going to make it to adulthood, you are not a fucking snake, right? Then you have to stick around to raise it. And therefore, we are, and for many other reasons, which we're also going to touch on, communal and nurturing. So to nurture a neonate, a child from neonate to adult stage. Currently, this is a 25-year period before the frontal lobe fully closes and you are fully comprehensive as an adult. So you think maybe take 5, maybe even 10 years off 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, right? As you get in those earlier stages. But you still have this extended period of time, even at 15 years, that is longer than any other species on Earth currently, or any other species ever has been that we know of, where you have to provide safety, warmth, clothing, shelter, food, and instruction to this child, right? A snake lays its eggs. I believe some actually like sit on them for a while, but they're gone before they hatch. A snake can do everything it's supposed to do when it hatches. A horse can walk within minutes and is fully grown within 4 years structurally. Like you can ride safely without causing damage within 4 years, right? But their mental development is by 2 years, right? So with us having that extended period of time and having all of those different things you need to provide this, a horse doesn't need shelter. A snake can find a hole in the ground, right? Having all these different things that you need, you see that it takes more than one person. When you have to have somebody watch the child just so that you can go out and forage or hunt, when somebody needs to tend the fire so that you can go out and forage and hunt, when somebody needs to cook the food, when somebody needs to gather the water, right? When you don't want to go out and forage and hunt on your own or gather water on your own because a singular human being alone is going to be fodder for animals, right? You are safety in numbers. When you have all of these needs that you need to meet one child's raising from neonate to adulthood, you absolutely have to have a community to do this. And it absolutely takes nurturing from every single member of community to do this. So the idea that your biological imperative is pump, pump, pass is really ridiculous, because you're not actually ensuring that the next generation succeeds. And for it to be a biological imperative, it must mean that the next generation, the species as a whole, succeeds, not just that you've managed to knock somebody up, right? So that's not really who we are on that biological imperative. We must nurture that life to its full adult stage so that it can move forward within life. These are all different forms of nurture, though. Protection, hunting, gathering, caring for a child while other people are out doing things, caring for a fire while other people are out doing things. And these are all valuable, impactful things within a community. These are all needed and impactful things and of equal weight and value within a community. And we see no evidence of gender roles in any of these a few thousand years ago, really. And then even then, only in specific spaces. So we absolutely see that Homo sapiens are nurturing and communal as a whole, species, male, female, doesn't fucking matter. We are all nurturing and communal. And when we see that we are all nurturing and communal, it is that knowledge that we are all nurturing and communal that can give us this understanding of what's really the problem that we're dealing with right now. Because truly the problem that the vast majority of us are dealing with right now is this feeling of disconnection, right? We live in a society that teaches us to hate each other, teaches us that one of us is better than the other, teaches us that you should put yourself out for exploitation. Not only should you be exploitable, but you should exploit others. Teaches you that to love somebody is to control and possess them. And then we wonder why we're all depressed. We wonder why we all feel disconnected. When you put aside the idea that there is something wrong with you, that you are faulty as a human, because you have to achieve some miraculous perfection to be worthy of some God. And you realize that really what we're supposed to be doing is taking care of each other, loving each other, upholding each other, ensuring that nobody is starving. Not throwing out food because it looks bad when children are starving here in the United States, right? We have places in the United States that are third world. Okay. And we're still throwing out food because it doesn't look pretty. So when we realize that this is not who we are and that instead we are nurturing and communal, we can absolutely move forward with that. Especially when we toss on the fact that we're also extremely creative. We are curious as fuck, and we are so able to not only be curious, but be scientific. We can adapt every adaptation we have, and that is science. Even our discoveries, our inventation, every tool you use, every thought process that you go through during the day that confirms or denies the shit around you, all of this is science. We are a curious, nurturing, communal being. We are love. And we have a space here. We have a niche here. We're not a chosen. We're not the greatest gift. We're not a pinnacle. But our niche is to care for the environment. Our niche is to tend. Our niche is to ensure that the animals around us, our siblings, are safe, that the plants around us, our siblings, are safe. Just like every other plant and animal on this planet has a niche, we too fit into a niche. We too have a part to play. And the part that we have to play is a kind, loving, beautiful part to play. And so I really am here to challenge you to see yourself as beautiful. To see yourself not as exploitable and exploitative, but as a kind, loving, nurturing creature that is really just trying to make in a fucked up space. And that's what we're going to finish with the lecture tonight. I'm going to go ahead and turn on comments in the TikTok just to end it up so that anybody who has been wanting to say something has the opportunity to. Before I do that, since this is the first time I've had it on tonight, I don't do racism. I don't do homophobia. I don't do gender phobia. You put any of that shit in my chat and you're going to be reported and blocked. I've debunked race theory for you. And the idea of gender is very new. The idea of gender roles is very new, and biological sex isn't binary. So I don't want to hear it. And nobody should give a flying fuck who everybody else is attracted to. So I'll go ahead and turn them on. If there's any comments that you want to ask, again, I want to let everybody know that I have put at the top of my link tree in my bio a link to Lee Berger's conversation and it's not publication, announcement, Lee Berger's announcement about Homo naledi. And I challenge everybody who's really interested in this to go and read it or go and watch it. It's about an hour. It's on YouTube. There are some amazing finds within this. There are and teases for more amazing finds, right? There is some really imperative stuff, and this is really going to change the way we view humanity. So I challenge you all to go and watch it. And tomorrow we will do an open debate. A semi-open debate. I have to know you before I allow you in my box. I mean, we should all know people before we allow them in our box, right? So we will do some more conversation on this and take a look at it. Absolutely, everybody. I'm not even sure. R817007. Let me tell you that there are more words of love in the Quran than there ever were in the Bible. The Quran is actually an extremely beautiful, accepting faith, whereas Christianity is not. And the only people who are God's chosen are the Judaic people. That's their God. He chose them. He didn't choose you, and he would appreciate it if you would stop telling everybody that he did. Say. You're so welcome. Thank you, Pirate. Awesome egg. So normally we do lives in here. So tonight we're actually dual streaming. So we are both in TikTok and we are on YouTube. And we're going to start doing more of that where it is dual streaming between the two. And also usually what we're saying is usually what we try and do within TikTok at least is turn on questions for a few minutes, a few times throughout the live. We're going to do a couple from now on a week that are subscriber comments only. And I'll open it up at the end like this. I'll have the YouTube open so you can go there. It is on the link tree in my bio. Absolutely, Stress. Actually, the first religion that I learned was Islam. I spent a year in an Islamic camp. It was a school that had come over from Iran in the Kurdish wars, the Kurdish issues that were going on in the early 80s. And because my parents were exploratory about faith, I actually learned Hebrew and Aramaic and learned the Torah and the Quran as a child. Could not speak any of them, could not quote you jack shit. But I do know for a real fact that Islam is actually an extremely beautiful faith. And that it has way more love than Christianity does. I do have to say, across the board, I have a problem with the God with the omnipotent deity that all three religions follow. I do not like your God. Your God is a problem for me personally. But the faith, Islam, is a very beautiful faith. Absolutely. And I am in Widda Ord on YouTube as well. There are about 4 people over here watching on YouTube. And you will find, I find more and more a lack of existence of a creator. So I do not see an omnipotent deity in anything. I certainly do not see an omnipotent deity that requires anything from us. I believe we're the creator. And so I believe that we are all energy, and that there is a stasis of energy. And when three synapses fire, they create a consciousness. And when three consciousnesses were created, they manifested. And that this is a manifestation. I believe that this manifestation has happened for millions of years. And so by now it has a lot of solidity to it. But again, it is just energy, which I believe is supported by science. So I do believe that we are our own creators on a lot of levels. And I believe Homo erectus used science and fire to create us. And I also, I believe in a vast majority of things. But I very much do not believe in any form of an omnipotent deity. I do believe deities exist. I believe that the deities that we see are archetypical of us, kind of like you see the god of mischief, which you see in every society has a god of mischief. The god of mischief is the archetype of mischief, right? So I do believe that deities exist, but I believe that they exist because we put energy into them. And by putting energy into them, we have given them that coalescence. This is Homo erectus behind me. Homo erectus speciates in Africa. The Neanderthals die out because there's a lack of genetic diversity within Neanderthal. Because Neanderthal didn't speciate from the entirety of Homo erectus like we do, like a genetic diversity within Homo erectus. And so they never had a great genetic diversity. A lack of genetic diversity within a population creates an inbred population, and you end up dying out because your children become inviable. Yeah, kind of a singular consciousness, kind of not a singular consciousness. So the other part of that is everybody's like, oh, you can manifest anything. Well, it's my consciousness against 8 billion fucking consciousnesses on this planet. I actually have been told over the course of my life, not only have I practiced energy work since I was very little, but I've known that I've had a composite. I mean, totally. Thank you, Anna. That's awesome. There's not a whole lot of schedule, but I do try and put out, that's one of the reasons that we're doing it not as a subscriber only live, is because I can actually publish a live event. I am working on getting in a space where I can schedule it with my mental health. My mental health makes it hard for me to actually be responsible. Like if I have an obligation to it, sometimes it makes it harder for me. So race as a theory has been debunked. The adaptation of skin color actually happens, absolutely. But because those adaptations of skin color, like light skin only works in a singular environment, so it's not an evolutionary advantage. Black skin works in more environments. It is more of an evolutionary advantage than light skin is. What do I think of the sesamoid bones in Neanderthals? I haven't seen. I'll look. I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't think I remember what you're talking about. I think I know what you're talking about, but it's something that's in the back of my head. But I think I know what you're talking about. I have to go and look though, because it's a faint thought process, and I can't remember what it was. Hey, Some Tripod, how are you? I haven't seen you in a hot second. I saw you just a bit as I was leaving last night. I'm trying to read back through the questions. Daco, I don't know. Did you bring that in before? I don't think you did, right? Okay, let me write that down. It's good to see you too, Tripod. There it is. Let's see. Okay, so Daco, I'll take a look at that. I haven't seen it. I'll go ahead and take a look at it tonight. I love you, Decray. Yeah, if you have a problem with the things that I use to decorate my body, to connect to my ancestry, to be myself, and you think that whether or not you find me attractive should have any weight in whether or not you can hear the things I have to say, then that is a moral issue that you have and you need to fix it. 10,000 BCE in Kenya, Anna. Wait a minute. Okay, so 10,000 KYA doesn't necessarily mean 10,000 BCE. So I would look for 10,000 KYA, which is 10,000 years ago is what it translates through. Massacre. Probably spell that like jack shit. Kenya. Put that in live or in YouTube. I would take a look at that, Anna, and see if you can find it under that. I do believe I have that one in my link tree, but I'm not exactly sure. I'll take a look and make sure. I'm having an issue with my link tree on my computer, which makes it a little bit harder for me to transfer some stuff over. We were talking about Homo erectus and the species that speciated from Homo erectus. Okay, Daco, that actually might be another one of those missing links like Graciopithecus freibergi that we've talked about in here. So I'll take a look on that. That's a pretty good idea. I haven't heard of another one, but I'm sure that there are more. They have mentioned with Graciopithecus that we know that there's probably more out there. We just haven't discovered them. So that's cool. I'll take a look at that. We are talking, I already answered that, I think, Kimmy. So my favorite facts about Erectus? That they crossed water. The fact that they made it to Flores and Indonesia, or to Flores and Luzonzas, Indonesia and the Philippines, and then the newer finds that show Australia and Northern Turtle Island, meaning that they really did make it global, right? And meaning that they absolutely had to find a way to cross water, again, not knowing what it is, but absolutely had to cross water. So that to me is just a stunning idea. Anybody doing anthropology? Homo erectus has something called subspecies, and sometimes you will hear them as different species. So my teacher and my professor, Dr. Melanie Chang, who has a YouTube in the link tree that I have up, she taught that Erectus is the species and that things like Heidelbergensis and Ergaster are the subspecies. But your teacher might teach differently. So please don't take that into an anthropology or a paleoanthropology class, and make sure your teacher thinks it that way, right? Make sure that before you use that on a test or something, because I don't want your teacher to be looking at it in a different way and it to cause problems for you. That's awesome. I will be honest, I only have my BA. I'm not going to go any further. I might look towards getting my PhD on a European level, which is done differently than in the United States. But I really only got the BA so that when I talked to archaeologists and anthropologists and to academia, I had some weight. Most of this stuff is stuff that I got before. And, for me, Western academia isn't really a goal, but I do know that you have to carry some weight in some fields, in some spaces. So, but I do want to make sure if you're going into this, please don't, if you're taking this into school, please don't take my teacher's teaching to your teacher and get in trouble with it. That's awesome, everybody. Thank you so much. Yeah, it is so poetic how they are the first to master both wire and fire. Okay, so not only are they first to master both fire and water, but they're the first to master clothing as well, right? And stone. So they're the first to master stone, which is the first well, yes, because we see the Oldowan tool complex from Homo habilis. We see that the first changes come from Homo erectus, that first idea of changing it, right? The adapting of the adaptation comes with Homo erectus. So this is the first to not just use stone to, but really start to understand stone, right? So you see that understanding of earth coming into play. You see that understanding of fire come into play. You see that understanding of water come into play, and you see that understanding of warmth with food or with clothing come into play. And really, the ability to have a bigger brain, that's consciousness, that's spirit, right? So you see that all of these masterings, all of these things that they have really give us everything we have. It's really their science, it's really their understanding, really their advanced nature that gives us all the stuff we came. See, baby, I'm not sure why you put a no before that. We all know that. Nobody was saying any different. What's the most profound academic principles when applying archaeological evidence to the future? So I have to state that anything that I might think is me being profound is pretty egotistical of me. So I'm not sure how I want to go with that. But the most profound academic principles, as in the academic principles to me that give the most weight, are the academic principles that require the ability to confirm testing, that accountability. So when we're looking at moving archaeology and anthropology and any form of science forward, accountability is extremely imperative. And especially when we're looking at moving forward science fields that have caused problems in the past or have been problematic or been applied problematically in the past, accountability is an extremely important thing. And that is one thing that I have to say that, I kind of went into archaeology from the knowledge with the community that I was in of archaeology is not always being the best thing. And so I had a little bit of when I went in, but I really did see, especially throughout and early on, there is this current try for the vast majority of people within archaeology and anthropology to try and change the narrative, right? To try and use accountability as a positive and to try and be accountable, right? And so that's one of the things that I really love in what I'm seeing currently within archaeology and anthropology is that it's not just the indigenous and Black voices coming in stating, listen, you need to fucking take some accountability, but it's also the white voices that are already within it going, shit, this is just really fucked up and we need to take some accountability. And that for me, I think is huge. When I was taught how race theory was debunked, I was taught it as this was our fault and we fucked this up and we need to fix this, right? And I was taught it by an Asian professor and therefore, a non-white person, right? And therefore there's a deeper level of it actually having a matter, right? As a, a positive move forward. It is also something that I saw being taught throughout with any white professor as well, with any other professor as well, with the exception of one that I have problems with. This thought process of this need for anti-racism to be a huge part of the movements forward, and the accountability that results from that, or the accountability that needs to be taken for that. It is very annoying that most history focuses on war and violence, but that's because war and violence doesn't start until after, or it starts right before we start writing it down, right? It's the writing it down in that time, right? That really gets it. Oh, okay. Thank you, C baby. So out of Africa theory is not just politics, and nobody debates that we started in Africa. What is debated is whether or not we left Africa once or left Africa multiple times. The original out of Africa theory states that only we out left Africa and only we left Africa once. The current model states that Homo erectus left Africa and that we left and came back and left and came back and left and came back and left and came back, and we didn't do our final leave until 50,000 years ago. But it is not politics, and you need to stop claiming everything is political. Just saying. It is not politics to talk about life. It is not politics to talk about science. It is not politics to talk about people being harmed or how people are being harmed. What is politics is to talk about how you're going to build a fucking road. Race is not politics. in this country, in the United States, structural racism is very political. Absolutely, right? But a person's life is not fucking political. And out of Africa theory and science is not political. What is political is whether or not you're going to build your road. Stop claiming it's turning it political when we talk about reality. It's just your trigger words to try and silence people, and it's really fucking annoying. So whatever skin color that you have is a dominant skin color for you. If you as a dominant skin color meet another person with a dominant skin color that, may be different, or you both have recessive skin colors that meet and therefore become dominant, any person of any skin tone with this person a similar skin tone can have a child a different skin tone. Sandra Lang in South Africa is an extremely famous case of a Black child being born to two very white European parents. Personally knew a pair of white European parents in my 20s. They DNA tested the child for the man because he thought it must not be his, because she must have cheated because the child was very Black. And they were very white. This happens. You can also have two very Black parents who have a very white child. This happens as well. This is recessive genetics. It just happens. You can also find 4C hair in Scandinavia and in Ireland, in Celtic countries. You can find, dark skin in all these spaces. You can find blue eyes in Africa. You can find red hair in Africa. Just is, right? Good night. Good night. Lizuvlia. It is not politics. If it is true, Blacks will become white and they lived in Europe for years. That's what the fuck happened. Do you know what Europeans looked like 10,000 years ago? Here, let me give you a clue of what Europeans looked like when they got to Europe. This is Cheddarman. This is the first Homo sapien in Europe. 10,000 years ago, and this is what he looks like. His skin tone is sub-Saharan, is what it is defined at, and his eyes are blue. He has a direct descendant 300 generations later that is currently living 2 miles from where his body is found. The people that he was a part of is one of the major mitochondrial groups in Europe currently. It accounts for 10% of the Northern European population. I actually belong to that mitochondrial haplogroup, among many others. He has many descendants from the haplogroup and family that he grew up with. It is not until 5,000 years ago that we start to see light skin becoming semi-predominant, as in coming close to equal to dark skin in European populations. And it is not till 2,000 years ago that we see white skin becoming predominant, as in over 50% of European populations. And in 1,000 years ago, and in the sagas, at least a good portion of the population is still documented as being dark of skin, like Egil, who is dark of skin. So the proof, boo-boo, is in the fucking pudding. Stop saying it's about politics. It's science. And if it was true, it's true, boo. It's true. And you are not going to take somebody into a different environment today and in 100 generations have them adapt. It is 100 generations for adaptation, to 2,500 years to adapt. You're not going to have them adapt today because we've adapted our surroundings. I can go to South Africa today and not ever have to enter direct sunlight, so I don't have to adapt the color of my skin. Your bone structure in Europe and your bone structure in Africa isn't different. You're a fucking racist asshole. You need to leave my live. You're gone. Sorry. Thank you, Anna. They're gone. I can't deal with that anymore. Okay, so I'm going to turn it off. I'll answer a couple of questions and then I'm going to take off. I'll leave it on sub only for a hot minute so I can see the questions. I lecture. I don't typically take on guests unless you have weight in this field that we're discussing. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to the beginning and make sure. Okay. I was just trying to get back and make sure I was getting all the questions. Europeans didn't leave Africa. Africans left Africa. Nobody really leaves Africa and the Levant area until 50,000 years ago, with the exception of indigenous Australians who are 70,000 years in their space. Most of Europe is not populated until after 30,000 years ago. You see lower regions of Europe being populated around 50,000 years ago. Then you kind of see a middle area starting to be populated at 30,000 years ago. Britain doesn't start to disappear or doesn't start to lose its ice cover until 27,000 years ago. Ireland and Scandinavia aren't out from underneath the ice until about 10 to 8,000 years ago, respectively. And so we don't see anybody inhabiting those areas until that time. Cheddar Men was the first person that we had found in Britain at 10,000 years ago, or the earliest person we had found in Britain at 10,000 years ago. We have two finds this year that are 13,000 and 14,000 years ago that we're currently testing. Tansy, you mean the Sandra Lang movie? Is it named Skin? I thought it was named Sandra Lang, but it could be Skin. What do I think about aliens? They exist, but ancient aliens is racist. Aliens are probably watching us going, fuck off. We're not coming down until you stop. We have been mixing since the beginning of time. Every single one of us has admixture from another species. Black is extremely beautiful. Matter is minimum. And I have to tell you that the statement that black is magic is really very true to me. I know that you look at me and you see a white girl, but I am not. I am indigenous. Not only that, I'm very mixed. And I have a grandmother. My direct maternal line ends in slavery. And ends in the escape from a plantation, pregnant with a master's child. And so for me, my heritage and my ancestry has always been very important. And for me, the richness and the differentiation between different tones that you can get because of latitude is so beautiful to me. And I find a rich beauty in pretty much all of them. But for me, there is this level of almost velvet that you get, an extremely dark shade of brown that is almost like it's just gorgeous to me. Like, to me, that I have a couple of like things that I just go, and that's one of them. Freckles is another one on extremely light skin. There's a couple of different things, but black skin is extremely beautiful and black is magic. Tansy, I think that you belong here. I do want to point out that I do understand that this is being done because somebody is policing facts and stating that facts are not right or something. But I also want to point out that when we police grammar or talk about proper English, that and I'm not accusing people who are stating this of having this thought process, but this is based in a very systemically racist thing. Especially within the United States, there is a lot of gatekeeping in education. And so when we look at different grammars or different ways of speaking English as improper, it's very It's very rooted in racism. And I know very many of us aren't using it as a racist thought process, right? It's more of a, you know, in this case, stop policing, you know, people's facts, stop policing things that you obviously don't understand, right? Or, you know, and I totally get that. But I just want to point out, because most people that come in here want to understand these things, that it is pretty much rooted in gatekeeping, because the education system within the United States actually blocks education from a lot of people. And so we see that different groups of people have less lack of or less access to education. Just stating, I am a scientist. We kind of all came from caves, but you know, I really believe that if we had the ability to create clothing, we had the ability to create houses, like hide houses or lean-to houses, right? So, you know, and the idea of cavemen, I mean, really, caves are extremely amazing environments to live in. A cave is going to maintain temperature year round. We still dig out houses because of the value of it. And not only that, but that shelter is pretty stable and sturdy in a space and a time when, you know, you might not find a lot of other stable and sturdy space and shelter. So there's a lot of value to living in a cave, right? Not only that, but there's a lot of beauty. And some caves even have their own water source. I mean, shit, running water in the Paleolithic, that's a fucking benefit, right? 50 to 70 KYA for not for Asians. So we're looking at 50 to 70. So we're looking at 70 KYA in Australia, Daco. 50 KYA for some areas of Asia, lower parts of Asia, not upper parts of Asia. But anything other than Indigenous Australia is after 50. So Indigenous Australia is the only thing out before 50,000 years ago. And what I mean by that is like the last mitochondrial DNA exiting, the last DNA exiting Africa, that everybody on Earth today is descended from that last DNA. That's that mitochondrial Eve that everybody outside of the Levant area has that descendant trace to. And then, of course, there's other mitochondrial Eves that come along as different mitochondrial haplogroups break. But that's that last mitochondrial Eve. So everybody outside of Africa or Indigenous Australians at this point descends from a group that comes out at 50,000 years ago. Dioxin? What's dioxin? I'll be looking that one up, Daco. You're full of all sorts of other information tonight, Daco. Thank you. Caves can have groundwater and plumbing, basically. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go. I will set up right after this that we'll be doing a live event tomorrow starting around 12:30 Pacific time. This live event will have an open forum. And I challenge everybody who wants to be a part of that open forum to go to the link tree in my bio and to pull up that YouTube by the presentation for Lee Berger that he just put out and look at this information on Naladi, because that is what we are going to be discussing tomorrow. And in discussing on Naladi, I'd love you to come armed. Like, come and tell me what you think this means, what this means for us, what this means for our understanding, how we're looking at this, what this is for us going forward, because this is some very significant changes. Some very significant changes. I got that. I'll put the teeth with that, Daco. Thank you. This is some very significant changes. I'll be doing both tomorrow as well, Ducray. And so from now on, I'll probably be streaming in both areas just so that I have that open platform in both areas. So I will be on both tomorrow. I will be here. It will be on YouTube. The YouTube channel is in Widda Ord. It is as well in the link tree in my bio. And so you can go on either space tomorrow. Comments will be open in both spaces tomorrow for the most part. If it gets trolly in here, TikTok, I'm telling y'all, if it gets trolly in here, I will turn off the comments no matter what. But for the most part, comments will be open tomorrow, and we will try and have it pretty opened up tomorrow, unless it becomes nasty. But I would love for this to be a positive debate forum where we can talk about what this really means about us going forward, and the really curious and amazing things that this really tells us about the evolution of us, right? This very new, very bright, very awesome information. And so I challenge you. It is the top link in the link tree in my bio. I would grab it, go and watch it. It's on YouTube. Dr. Melanie Chang is right underneath it. So if you haven't watched her yet, her TED Talk on paleoanthropology is really amazeballs. So go ahead and watch Lee Berger's information on Naledi, and then tomorrow at noon, maybe 12:30. Tomorrow at 12:30, and I will put it up as a live. Thank you for the subscription. I will put it up as a live event so that everybody can see it, and it will count down. And we will talk about Naledi, and we will talk about Lee Berger's new discoveries. And again, I would love all of you to go out and grab some of this information, maybe even looking at it a little bit more from what you've seen or what you see with Lee Berger, and bring that idea and that curiosity tomorrow and participate in this as a discussion forum where we really take a look moving forward. Thank you guys all for a beautiful time tonight. Thank you guys in YouTube for joining from YouTube. And I will see you guys tomorrow. It's been a blast and a pleasure, and I enjoy you guys, and I appreciate you. Have a good one, guys. Bye, Anna, and everybody else in YouTube. Let me figure this out.